Radio check. Loud and clear.
KSL Sports and KSL Podcast present Mode Push, an American view of F1, starting now.
I'm stuck. This is what you get with this Odyssey.
I'm gutted. I'm absolutely gutted.
I enjoyed this so much. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, everybody, welcome on in. It's another edition of Mode Push, an American view of F1. I'm Alex Kirry. On the other side of the co-hosting position of this podcast, he is, of course, our number one driver, Dan Jimenez. In the number one seat. His seat's not in question. It's everybody else's, all right? Who would be the helmet Marco of our team? Maybe somebody just like hovering over the button here at KSL Sports, ready to just turn this thing off. Or, as they put it, maybe to mentor you and I. You know, that's...
Right, mentor in quotation marks. Just excessively intimidating.
Just terrorizing people. Well, we're into it another week here, and so far they haven't turned it off. So there we go. Dan Jimenez, Alex Kirry, as usual, here with you on the podcast as we get you ready. Not just for the upcoming races, but also the races that were. And this past weekend, we were treated to quite a boring race. Dan, your thoughts on being able to live through what was the very first race of the European season at Imola? Nonetheless, I mean, it's one of those interesting tracks that you still go back and race at, even while everybody goes, "Oh yeah, you can't pass there." And as soon as the order is set on the grid, then that's how it's going to end up, unless there's massive rain or a massive crash. And we had neither of those things, so we had a pretty set finishing order, and what we got was not a very exciting race, but we got a 1-2 from Max and from Lando this time around, and still quite interesting on the point side of things for all these teams.
Yeah, I will be honest that I fell asleep from the pit stops to like lap 43, but then the not Crofty, but whoever was the replacement announcer this weekend, his voice went up like half an octave. So I opened an eye and I was like, wait a second. I thought Lando's gap to Max was like 7 seconds, and now it's like 4 seconds.
Right.
And then honestly, the last 12 laps were as good of racing. I mean, a pass didn't happen, but seeing Lando take that amount of time out of Max's lead is not something we have seen in like 2 years. I think it was honestly, I think the biggest signal that the tide is shifting, and that Max and Red Bull they are not as clearly dominant and running away with these races as they are used to. And Lando is legitimately fast. He was super quick on those old hard tires, and I was believing that he was going to get past Max on the last lap, but he was, as Lando said, he was 1 to 2 laps short, and the track itself is not super conducive to passing. Like you said, it's an old European track that hasn't adapted to modern F1 with wider and larger cars. It needs to be a wider track to have more racing lines if they're going to want passing outside of just like that one DRS zone, which they shortened for this year, which they probably shouldn't have. I think Oscar was complaining about that. But I walked away encouraged that we were going to have a very interesting Monaco, and into the summer that McLaren is coming.
Speaking of old tracks that haven't adapted, yes, Monaco this weekend. I know that all the spectacle that goes along with Monaco is great, but the racing isn't always. It's like qualifying historically is more exciting than the race itself, typically, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Last year's qualifying, I think, was probably my favorite qualifying of the year, at least most memorable, because it came down to who could get closest to the wall. And I think even Max might have barely touched the wall with his front tire. It is all about qualifying at Monaco, unless rain comes, which it did last year, which created a bunch of chaos. But without the rain in the dry, it's going to be pit strategy and qualifying is what it's all about. But Ferrari is really fast at these high downforce, low speed tracks, and so I think there's a lot of optimism that Ferrari, if they could come out and Charles can put together one of his magic laps, then maybe he can break his Monaco curse. And I do not think Red Bull will be strong. Monaco does not play to Red Bull's strengths. That's for sure.
So what are when you look at it and you say, okay, Red Bull, it doesn't play to Red Bull's strengths. I think that Ferrari, speaking of wah-wah, I was looking at it and I can't remember what I saw. Is it the last time that there was a Ferrari podium at Imola was Michael Schumacher? So I think we're talking about I think we're talking about a bad streak for, what is considered Italy's home race and Italy's home team, and those two things haven't met up for quite some time. And if you're a Ferrari fan, you're a little bit depressed too because you thought you were making all this headway, and it turns out that you guys aren't any step closer to beating McLaren. McLaren seems like they're kind of making a little bit of a gap with you, and you are decidedly the number 3 team right now on the grid.
Yeah. There's a lot of optimism after the first couple of free practices because I think Charles led both practices on Friday. And then it seemed like they had an issue in qualifying where they didn't get their, tires up to temperature or something. And then in the race, Charles says he had issues with his battery deployment and that they were losing a lot of time down the stretch or the front straight. And so, yeah, Ferrari's, their single lap speed is high, but they don't have the race pace of Red Bull and McLaren. And I think that that's McLaren's strength right now is that they're actually beating Red Bull on race pace when the tires are getting worn and when the fuel's burning off. But that's interesting. Ferrari has not performed at their home track. I mean, they'll have another chance when they get to Monza, but honestly, Monaco might be their best bet or their best chance out of the year, just given how it's a low speed track, and they're pretty good at those.
So going over some of the results from last week before we put a bow on, totally on that race last week. The results, was there anything that surprised you? Is there anybody who kind of stepped up? Obviously, a race like Imola, and because it's the 30th anniversary, we remember, Roland Ratzenberger and Ayrton Senna dying on the same weekend. And there was so much, to the honor of those two guys and what it's done for like the sport itself. Of racing, and then in the end we have this race, and you have all these distractions of what could or all the things that kind of get in the way on a race weekend versus the stuff that's actually the races itself. So I know that I want to go over some of the people who are really, really good and some of the people who are not good. Obviously, you had a win for Max. You had a really, really strong weekend from Lando. I think that the teams that are the most disappointing right now, if we're really going to talk about some things that I'm looking at and going, man, F1 could have taken such a step forward. I'm disappointed with how Williams has gone. I'm not talking about the Logan Sargent experience. I'm talking about just Alex Albon, the car itself. This Williams car that took so many steps forward last year has not seemed to have taken any of those steps forward the rest of this year.
Yeah, I agree. They have not carried that momentum on from last year, and it's a bummer to see. And it seems like they're always strapped for resources. You'd think that at this point they'd be spending to the cost cap, but they're still probably working their way towards it based on the fact that they literally don't have spare parts and spare chassis. So I think they have to maybe race more conservatively because of that. And yeah, this weekend they had the issue with they didn't get Albon's wheel on in his first pit stop. His right front, they didn't get it on completely straight, and that ruined Albon's weekend. And then Sargent was just super slow. It is disappointing. On the flip side, I think drivers or teams that are surprising to the positive, like Lance Stroll with the 9th place. Like, you can't expect more from Lance than finishing 9th. Like, I thought he had a pretty decent weekend, and then Yuki Tsunoda quietly is continuing to put together like a solid midfield year. Like, I'm sure RB Carb, Red Bull, Cash App team wants better results than that. But I think Yuki's eking out of all the performance he can out of that car each weekend. And I think he has taken a measurable step forward this year and is making a good case for himself for that second Red Bull seat for next year.
Speaking of people who have not taken significant steps forward, and teams that we expected a lot out of and probably it was a little bit too early for getting that excited about it, is Aston Martin. And even like Fernando Alonso, who, is usually pretty solid, doesn't make uncharacteristic type of mistakes, and he had one this weekend going off the track in FP3 and wrecking his car. The team put him basically on the pit lane to start, almost as a concession of, We know we're not even going to get anywhere close to winning this thing. We're just going to kind of put the car out there and see and just read some stuff for our own studying. Aston Martin has been really, really bad so far this year.
Yeah, it became a test session as soon as he had that bad qualifying after the wreck. The race was just about gathering data. Now, a lot of like Imola is the big weekend for bringing updates for all the teams, and a lot of teams brought a bunch of updates, including Aston Martin. And so, I mean, it's valuable to send him out there for 63 laps and have him pit a couple of times and make some changes to see how the car adapts. So that's good. And but yeah, terrible weekend for Fernando, and hopefully, he had a really good Monaco last year, and so hopefully he can turn it around coming into this next week.
I'm trying to think of more winners and losers, and it's hard not to mention the losers without mentioning the difficult weekend again for Mercedes. By the way, the 6th place finish for Lewis Hamilton equals his best finish of the year, which is not exactly what you want to hear if you are a Silver Arrows fan. So what on earth is going on at Mercedes? It just seems like now, Lewis leaving when he is more of an indicator of, I think that he's seeing the writing on the wall, and that is that everybody else seems to be making all this progress. And for some reason, Mercedes cannot figure out the new regulations and the floor versus the ground and mechanical versus, non-mechanical grip and all these things that really has set the 8-time world champion team back.
Yeah, it's, crazy. It's 6th and 7th for Mercedes. You think, oh, what a terrible weekend. But that's honestly they are the 4th or 5th fastest team right now. So 6th and 7th is the best that they can probably expect. 7th and 8th, Sergio, they finished ahead of Sergio, who would normally finish ahead of them. But I mean, something to remind ourselves of is this time last year, Mercedes completely scrapped their design concept for their, this generation of car. They had doubled down on the zero side pods to start their second year of of the regulations. And this time last year, they're like, well, screw it. We're going to go with the Red Bull concept. And so they're a year and a half essentially behind everyone else on development of this car because they lost those first 18 months of the 2022 and the first half of the 2023 season. So they're still playing from behind. And yeah, Lewis saw the writing on the wall early, and I think definitely made the right call to go to Ferrari. And Mercedes has to figure out how they're going to put in that seat. And, I think there's still the strongest candidate is likely Antonelli if they can't get an experienced driver. And, news from Sky Sports out of Monaco this week is that Carlos Sainz is completely off the table for Mercedes. It's either Red Bull or Audi. So Mercedes isn't going to have a chance at him.
So what does that other seat at Ferrari look like? I mean, not at Ferrari, rather, what does Carlos Sainz's future look like? Can Red Bull put together, I mean, that just seems like the best fit. If you're going to be talking about being competitive, Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc at Ferrari, and then, of course, the proven now young, very, very young team with Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris at McLaren. Like, you've got to put together something that's not just Max Verstappen and then somebody else babysitting the second car. If Carlos Sainz gets in that second car at Red Bull, we're talking about a really, really fun race at the front end. Can they work out some of the weird, don't necessarily get along that well type of relationship between Carlos and Max? I know everybody says that they're all friends on the grid, and mostly they are, certainly compared to the old times when teams used to not get along and racers used to not get along. Where's Carlos Sainz and the possibility of him going to Red Bull, or what's his future look like?
Yeah, the reporting is that it's down to Red Bull or Audi, with Audi making, the larger offer. They're going to have to, right? Because Audi Sauber is going to suck for the first while, right? So they're going to have to offer him a bunch of money to entice him. But I think that what Red Bull is seeing is McLaren and Ferrari are closing up to the point where if they want to secure the Constructors' Championship, they have to have two very solid drivers. And Sergio, I think, would continue to make excuses for him. And, he hasn't had a terrible year so far, but he had a really bad weekend in Imola and not making it into Q3. And so, yeah, the heat is on. And the business decision that Red Bull has to make is that they have to have the two most competitive drivers that they can hire and afford. And clearly it's not Sergio anymore. And I think Carlos Sainz is he's definitely the fastest available driver, if not like the fastest driver that might not even be available. Like and now we have a Lando win recently, but prior to that, he was the only guy who had won in the last 2 years that wasn't in a Red Bull. So if you're Red Bull, I think you have to sign him. And if you don't, you might be worried with what talent you have to end up settling for in a very tight constructors championship, probably this year and next year.
So what's the future of a guy like Checo in the sport? I mean, that's a very, very talented driver. We all know that. I don't know where he is in terms of talent compared to, I don't know, is he a top 8 type of a driver? He's kind of right there on that edge. But you could make the argument that if he's not, then there might not be a place for him, because after that, it's like, some teams aren't willing to pay that type of money. And so what does the future for a guy like Sergio Perez look like? And is he going to be off the grid and be kind of just like the odd guy left out, even though he's a talented driver?
The only place I could see him fitting is in a team that needs a veteran to help them do development. So he would come with a very solid understanding of how the Red Bull car drives or should drive, and therefore should theoretically help a lot with the car development. So if you're somebody like Haas or maybe a new Andretti team that just, hey, we need a veteran we can trust the feedback from, then I think that's a good spot for him to land. But I don't think he's going to anywhere where someone is looking to be championship point contending in midfield level speed.
Okay, let me give you some scenarios then. Aston Martin, we don't know what the future of Lance Stroll looks like, right? Or do we? And it's just no one saying it, that he's just going to have a spot forever.
Indefinitely, yeah, driver number 2.
Okay. That's how I was wondering, is like if at some point they go, hey, we got to just bag this, because he could maybe end up there, but kick Sauber, that's going to be, I mean, when does Nico have to take that seat? Is he going to be in it next year?
Next year.
Yeah. Okay, so you have a spot open up at Haas, like you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
But K-Mag is also not really a great option for them there. So if you're going to be developing somebody and you're on the, kind of junior Ferrari circuit, so maybe, I don't know, that might be a landing place for Checo. I don't want Checo to be out of the sport.
Yeah, no, I think he's a fun personality, and I think that Haas could go like split with a veteran like Sergio and a rookie like Oliver Behrman or something.
Okay, all right, there you go.
I think that could be a good pairing for them. That's if Haas lasts another season. I mean,
that's what I'm saying. Like, how on
I
earth?
feel like it's touch and go with those guys.
How on earth do they reject just whole cloth, like the idea of and everybody's poo-pooing this idea of a Cadillac Andretti team. And I get it. They probably want it maybe more for the new regulations in 2028. But at the same time, you've got, I know that Williams and Alpine and, they're grandfathered in. They've got their past, they've got their histories with the sport. But I just can't imagine somebody being more abysmal right now than a Williams car who was making strides and then suddenly is back to, Claire Williams type of ineptitude, I feel like right now. Does that mean for me to say it like that?
No, it was the truth, right? Yeah, Gene Haas he's a businessman first and foremost, and I think that there might be some sort of deal working behind closed doors for them to exit the sport and create a spot for Andretti Cadillac. I don't know. That's all speculation, but you could definitely believe that something like that is happening, because he's, 10 years into an F1 with no real gains or, vision of or potential for
he might have that many
for wins.
He might have that many points in F1 as well.
In that many years. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So Sergio might end up at a place like that where they just a big part of a new team or a team that's struggling is a driver that you can trust to say that the car development is moving in the right direction. Something that Mercedes didn't do with Lewis when Lewis was warning them about their development. And so you don't want to be a Andretti. I've seen a lot of speculation about who the two drivers would be for a new Andretti team, and I keep seeing Colin Herta and guys from IndyCar, and I'm just like, no, you have when Haas started out, they signed 2 veteran drivers. I can't remember who they were, but I remember they were veterans, and you just have to you can't start with a brand new rookie as well as a brand new team. You would be very lost. And so Sergio, I think, could make some good money, do that for 2 or 3 years, and then retire.
Okay. From a show note and a personal note here, I got the email this week about the possibility. They're looking for applications to be entered for folks to be marshals at the F1 race in Las Vegas. It's the week after Thanksgiving. I would imagine a lot of this comes with some trainings that you and I don't necessarily want to go to. I feel like you'd get the gig. You just put down that you have that former kind of Ford racing engineering background, and so they kind of would, they lean your direction, but they opened it up for the possibility. Would that interest you? That be the way you participate in the race down there in Las Vegas?
Oh man, I'd be all in on being a marshal. Like I could see you and I running out there on the track, picking up carbon fiber.
Mine would be the guy. I'd be the guy whose pants almost fell down. You remember that guy? I don't remember where it was.
Yeah.
It's like the cousin of a Saudi prince or something that was allowed to be
it's
a
like,
track
dude.
marshal. That would be me.
No. The marshals generally are not the most physically fit individuals.
Yeah, see, then I'm in.
I think
then
you
I'm
and I
in.
are good for. But we can run out there in between virtual safety cars and pick up carbon fiber.
Okay, so because I was looking at it and I was like, oh, you know what? Because I'm getting down to it again, where I have to start looking at where or when the we have to start turning in our media credentials and all that stuff for this year and see if we qualify for all that. And I thought, you know what? Let's just skip all of it and find our way in there as marshals. Although I feel like we'd be at a disadvantage because we'd probably have to go down to Vegas and train or something like that. I don't know. Is there a sexual harassment video that they're going to make us watch?
I'd be curious, how much training that they make you do. I'm sure it's position based, but
yeah,
I'd be up for it.
Well, but at the same time, I mean, I don't know. We don't get paid for it though, do we? I don't know. I'm trying to figure out.
If there's pay, I can't imagine it's very much. I gotta think it's all volunteer.
Okay, I'm trying to look at what the actual it doesn't say anything about there's 600 positions available. Okay, ready for this? Now it says aimed at providing more opportunities to local, regional residents interested in becoming new marshals. So that is they're looking
regional.
Yeah. We're kind of right there.
Yeah.
So they said we had over 1,000 seasoned marshals apply to support the inaugural race in Las Vegas last year, and we're going to need more people. Flagging and communication marshals, okay? All right, you know all your flags. We did the flag quiz one time on this show. Intervention.
I can wave a blue flag at Logan Sargent telling him to get out of the way.
Intervention marshals, which provides assistance during on-track incidents, and they offer trackside support for drivers. Look, if somebody wants to hop on the back of your moped to get to the other side of the...
Let's be moped drivers.
That's exactly right. Pit lane and grid marshals, that's where I think we could really do it, right? Assist in the pit lane and grid safety and discipline, and then marshal support, aid in hospitality. See, this would be me. I'd be carrying around drinks to offer to the other marshals, equipment management, and transport for other marshals as well. So there you go. So selected marshals are required to serve throughout the entirety of the event from November 20th to the 23rd, and they'll be contracted to fill these duties with compensation in the form of value in kind goods or services. What's that mean, Dan? You read something like that? Does that mean it's a big paycheck? Is that what you heard?
It's not cash. They're just saying it's not cash.
We are not paying you. You get to have a fun time. But that's what it says.
Yeah, you get to stand on this one corner and watch the cars go by.
You might get a hat.
I say we throw our application in just to see what happens. You can always back out later.
Look, it even says there's only one training program you have to go through, and they give you a handful of dates. We could definitely go down for this thing. All right.
Make it work.
I'm thinking about it. Let's just throw our hats in there and we'll see. And if you and I are standing next to each other with oversized helmets on, with my pants falling down as I run out to get a piece of carbon fiber on the track, then I will absolutely do it. All right. Anything else we need to know about the upcoming race at Monaco this weekend? Who's the favorite? How do you win this race? Is it just if you're the person who ends up winning qualifying? Is it going to be the thing where whatever order they qualify, that's what we're going to see the ending of the race in?
Yeah, most likely. So you got it's all about qualifying and then not screwing up your strategy and staying out of trouble. I mean, it's a small track, so passing is hard, but that means there's zero room for forgiveness. And we've seen, Leclerc and other drivers in recent years crash out of qualifying, crash out of the race with tiny mistakes. And so I still really enjoy Monaco. It's a visual spectacle. It's the crown jewel of F1. And it happens on the same day as, two other great races, the Indy 500 and the Coke 600. So it's a great day to be a race fan. And I look forward to it every single year.
So NASCAR did have a fight, by the way, over this last weekend.
Man.
I don't know if you saw that.
I could do 30 minutes on just this topic.
Ricky Stenhouse, and I know you're shocked about the next name, Kyle Busch, involved in a little bit of a scuffle.
Dude, so I worked with Ricky when Ricky was starting. He was running Xfinity Series, which is like the F2.
Like
and then when he moved up to the Cup Series, like F1, that's when I was at Roush and he was driving the 17. And Ricky, he's the kind of guy that he isn't going to back down from a fight. And when they did the post wreck interview after he got wrecked out on lap 2, for those who weren't watching, it was the All-Star race in NASCAR. Lap 2, he gets wrecked by Kyle Busch, which is something Kyle Busch does all the time.
Absolutely,
wreck other guys.
Yes.
And then he in the interview he says I'm going to be waiting around and I'm going to have Richard Childress, the owner of Kyle Busch's car, hold my watch, which was just an inference or implication that he's like, I'm going to get in a fist fight with Kyle Busch. So he called his shot and he had to follow up, right? Because he said it on national television. So race finishes and they're interviewing Joey Logano, who won the race, and they're split screen with Kyle and Ricky in each other's faces at the end of the race.
I love it.
And you could tell Ricky was just looking for the moment to throw the punch.
Right.
He knew, he walked up to that conversation knowing he was going to get in a fight, and he was just waiting for the moment. So Kyle Busch says a bunch of stuff, and then Ricky throws a punch. And my not favorite, but the most entertaining part to me was as soon as they throw a punch, guys start to pull him apart, and Ricky Stenhouse's dad, goes after Kyle Busch.
Yes.
And you hear Ricky yell at Dad, stop.
Well, and his dad, by the way, Ricky Stenhouse got $75,000 in fines.
Yeah.
One of his mechanics got 8 races of being suspended.
Suspension, yeah.
And one of his engine tuners also got a 4-race suspension. And Ricky Stenhouse Sr. is indefinitely not allowed to be around at any of these races for a long time.
No, they pulled his hard card. Yeah, he's out. He can't get into the pits anymore.
Boring.
But it's just both those guys are veterans. They know better. What are you gaining out of this is my question. It's Kyle Busch has gotten swung at so many different times from so many different people. He's pissed off over the years.
Who's the Kyle Busch of F1? Is there one?
It's
these types of
it's probably Kevin Magnussen. Everyone's had a beef with him, and they're just all right, well, that's just what he does. And so, Ricky, it's the All-Star race. It doesn't count for any points, but if you win the race, it's $1 million. So I understand it's a big deal. But it's what NASCAR wants, right? And I just am trying to imagine an F1, Max getting crashed out, punching, George Russell after the race, and Yas going after him.
I was going to say, one thing we can guarantee is that Yas actually would get involved, and he would be also right there throwing the punch. So, yeah. So I'm trying to figure out if it'd be a good thing. I know this is one thing that F1 goes, well, this is why we're better than other racing, other races across.
They turn their noses up at this,
but there's a little bit of that WWE situation there that makes F1 knows exactly what it is. And they know exactly that this is good for business, and in a weird way too. So that's part of what they're okay. Podium predictions for this weekend at Monaco. I don't know if you've heard this before. Charles Leclerc grew up on the streets of Monaco. He's in a race that he's walked the streets of Monaco. And I'm like, yeah, that hasn't helped him before. But any thoughts on how this thing's going to end in anybody's favor except for Max Verstappen?
Man, bleeding heart it's Charles is going to have to. He's going to win Monaco sometime, and I think this year's is as good of a chance as any. I think the Ferrari is going to do well around the slow corners and streets of Monaco, and this is Charles's year. And I think Lando, I'm going to say an Oscar Piastri second.
Oh,
and a Lando third.
So wait a minute, you said it's going to be a win for Charles. And then Oscar and Lando. So 0 Red Bulls on the podium.
I think Red Bull is going to have Singapore level
kind of a
issues.
Weird, odd weekend for them where they just kind of don't figure it out. Okay. I don't hate that. I'm going to go straight chalk almost on this. And I'm going the opposite direction. I'm going to go Max with the win. And then it's going to be a Charles second, Carlos third. So a Ferrari 2-3 to really mix things up in the constructors title as well. So there you go. Those are our predictions.
All right.
And we'll hold each other to them next week, and we'll be back again to talk about it again. Dan, thanks, man, as usual. We appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
There you go. Another edition of the show in the books. Tell somebody about F1 and tell them how amazing the sport is. Not that many guys punching each other in the face in the pit lane. We will come back again next week. For Dan, I'm Alex. We'll see you next time, everybody.